So what we're really doing, although it's being done under the cover of studies of the Orient and of Japanese culture and so on, what we're really doing is going down through the cultural, historical, religious, artistic manifestations to the fundamental games which life is playing. And if you get the hang of these, the comprehension of various culture forms becomes ever so much easier. You see, whatever you study, to become a master of the subject, you need to realize what are the fundamental principles. And very few teachers of anything ever give them to you, because quite often they don't know them.
The Dawdlers' philosophy is an amateur production of two dudes in a basement with no association, affiliation, cooperation, or combination with any other entities, primate or otherwise. The views expressed may or may not have merit, and the listeners are encouraged to argue amongst themselves. If you wish to express appreciation for the endeavors undertaken, please visit patreon.com/dawdlersphilosophy to support the show. Send an email to dawdlersphilosophy@gmail.com, or rate and review on Apple Podcasts. For updates and downtakes, follow on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or subscribe on your favorite podcast application.
Okay, so we're back with this goddamn haunting the margins shit. Again.
Yeah, man.
It's been a while.
It's been too long.
It's like dawdling within dawdling.
Tonight we're going to talk about someone that might be canonizable as the patron saint of dawdling philosophy. And you're like, what? No,
I know.
I don't hear it.
Okay, I mean, I get it, but I think I get it. But anyway, yes, go.
We're going to talk about Alan Warts and all Watts.
Yeah.
I found some little clips that I think illustrate how he, too, may have had some sympathies with our dawdly ways.
Excellent.
In the previous Haunting the Margins episodes, we've talked about Robert Anton Wilson.
Never believe fully in anybody else's BS.
And Terence McKenna.
Culture is not your friend.
And there's a third member of this triumvirate of 1960s, 70s hippie marginal guys. That was Alan Watts, who all were influential to me in my education, and who I all have respect for in different ways, and that I think all fit in this notion that we were developing of the intellectual margins. Some of the things that I think we were agreeing on that kind of characterize the marginal characters were that they seem to have an above average sense of humor and incorporate humor with their intellectualizing.
Mm-hmm.
They violate taboos of central, moderate, agreeable, entrenched, institutionalized culture of their time. What they do with their careers seems to be different. They could probably, if they had that value set, choose to pursue a chair emeritus at Sioux City or something, but they don't, and that they've got radical ideas. I think that Watts fits all four of those. Do you have any comments, additional thoughts about this whole, not necessarily Alan Watts, but this concept, margins, that we're making?
Yeah, so the thing that I always, one of my main motivations for wanting to talk about people like this is because if people aren't taken seriously and yet, what they have to say has some cogency or whatever, you don't feel that what they're saying is being said by a complete moron or whatever, or somebody, they never jump the shark or whatever, they never go in a direction that would make you raise your eyebrows. It does make you wonder, why were they, and the ones we've talked about, Alan Watts we're talking about today, and any future people, why weren't they successful in terms of being incorporated, or for their ideas being strongly incorporated into a more center central part of the culture. And some of these people might have had a more success than others. I think that's a wrinkle we have. We've been mostly dealing with black and white. Like you're in, you're out, you're at the margin. But really, some seem to have penetrated deeper towards the middle, the galactic center of intellectual thinking more than others, it seems. And it may be for various reasons that hopefully we flesh out a little bit each time for each person. But my question then becomes, in this long-winded ass fucking talk that I'm doing right now, is, well, okay, we could talk about, well, it's society and it's the academy and all that kind of stuff, but is there anything about the people themselves that is causing them to not be able to, get along with the central body? Sometimes I think they wouldn't want to, like that they think these people take themselves too seriously. You mentioned humor is one of the, sort of tenets that we appreciate about, or that we have noted about these individuals. But so it's kind of an odd thing. It's like, and I can't believe I'm going to go here because I'm like not prepared to all of a sudden really talk about it. But it's like there's that whole idea of the Overton window, the idea that something is at the margins until some point later in the future or whatever, for whatever reason, the window, the range of, degree that is acceptable and not taboo in a society or whatever shifts, and all of a sudden something that was marginal becomes central, perhaps. I think so far these individuals, if the Overton window has shifted, it's not shifted much in their direction in the same way that you would think other things have in our society.
I think it's shifted in the other direction.
Shifted away.
One of the things that I've been wondering about is, and maybe there's something to be said for, you can't identify these people at the time. It needs to be that they're dead and gone before they can be appreciated. I don't know. But who are the people nowadays? Like, where are the Terence McKennas of today? And I personally don't yet have them. I'd like to find them. If anybody out there listening has a suggestion
for
of
sure.
Who are the countercultural, rebellious, but intelligent folks that have something interesting to say, I want to know who they are. And yeah, most of the messages from Watts and crowd, I think the 2020 America is further away than 1969 America.
Yeah, but
from what they were trying to say.
But the one thing I think about right now is like people would probably say members of the IDW or whatever, right? They would say that people like Eric Weinstein or
peer review is a cancer from outer space.
Brett Weinstein have.
I don't know who the person is who reviewed this, but they don't understand the material, and all of their critiques suck.
Been, dejected.
Oh, you're asking for it.
Yeah. Peterson, he's another one.
I'm a black woman who has 2 children.
It's like they always talk about these guys, and when I was looking up the Alan Watts stuff, there was like genius or charlatan. And I'm thinking like, well, okay, as I understand it, from what little I looked up, and I unfortunately am not the one here today that's going to be like throwing out the sources. But, he was bright, very bright as a child. Some say he was a child prodigy or whatever. And that he clearly just was, moving along to the beat of his own drum to an extent. But that there's, he went and got his education and did a whole bunch of different things, and people can question his motives, and we can maybe talk about them. I don't know. But I think about some of these other people of the IDW. Many of them are in academia. But would you say Peterson is definitely in the center? Like, I think a lot of people really despise him. Zizek is another person who people despise.
Wisdom is the most disgusting thing you can imagine.
And yet, is he not incorporated in the academy to an extent? I just don't know. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, I threw out Zizek, and he's not part of the IDW for anyone who's want to, shaking their heads at me or whatever. But you want to know who these people are, and it's like, I think it's a really muddy water situation right now. The people who are in the in-group or whatever, when they talk, sometimes you're like, what are you saying? You know, like it's all also the whole psychology thing, and we can't replicate our studies, and there's like branches of academia as which we're saying is sort of the central housing, you know, warehouse repository for intellectual stuff and what's acceptable and what's not or whatever. But even there, it's getting all messed up. So maybe the window is just falling apart, and there's no way to know where anyone is exactly because things are shifting all the time. Period. Sorry, I'm done.
The four criteria that I was putting out before your question were what I think are the answers to your question. Why are these people marginal?
Feel bad asking. Can you go over those four things again?
Humor, taboo, vocation, radicalism.
Well, that's what I mean, is that a lot of these people pick and choose what they use now in some ways. I think things are all messed up.
So you're saying, well, you can throw out all these names of people now, and I'm aware of them, and Jordan Peterson. The trick is, it's easy to be outside the norm, but to be outside the norm in the right way, to still have something to say that's respectable and interesting and informed. So one way to be out there is to... Oh, recently we watched that Flat Earth documentary.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
So, and I thought that was a pretty interesting epistemic exemplar. And what was it called? Bending the Curve or something?
No, it was Behind the Curve, was it?
Yeah.
Ah, such a good...
Flattening the...
Yeah,
flatten the curve.
curve.
Make the Earth flat. If it wasn't before, it is now.
It was on Netflix.
It's easy to say heretical things. Yeah, it's on Netflix. Everybody go check it out if you want to check it. It's pretty good.
I like it.
It's easy to say radical stuff, but one of the things that those people do is literally set up an antagonistic situation between them and the entirety of quote-unquote science. Mm-hmm. It's like us versus science, and we need to take them down or whatever because they disagree with us. I think that's one way to indicate a marginal viewpoint or person that probably isn't worthy of respect.
Yeah.
For whatever flaws the central zeitgeist has, it's not total garbage. It's not like, we want to throw out all of science. It's useless. We hate it. These people might have some critiques or some holes to poke or some things they wish were added. You know, they seem to be aware of what is said by the scientists, respect it, address it, etc.
No, for sure. They're playing off
less so.
Yeah. Flat Earthers less so. I mean, there is nothing in Alan Watts' language that I find like disagreeable. It's extraordinarily sober in a way.
Yeah.
And then he says words that I like he talks about systems and stuff like. I'm like, ooh, you got me with systems. But you know what I'm saying?
That's a big one for me because I have so many bells and whistles and chimp activation set off mechanisms, phrases, So when anybody, if I can listen to an hour of them talk or read 100 pages of their writing and not have my chimp a jangling, that's a good sign.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Or at least they're not making you laugh out loud at them, to an extent, the flat earther type people. Mm-hmm. There's some classic moments in that little video. Anyway.
Don't take my word for it. I could be a mental patient recently released from an institution.
So since Watts is coming from the direction of spirituality / religion / self-help almost, I think that many, to my perception, might have a tendency to say, oh, Alan Watts, he's kind of like Eckhart Tolle.
I see exactly what everybody else sees, but I feel or sense something that is deeper than the physicality, and that is hard to put into words.
Or even Deepak Chopra.
And all you have to do is understand the principles of science and understand that you have within you the resources to intuitively grasp this mystery.
Or some of these people. More so than like, wait, you're going to talk about him on a podcast that talks about Wittgenstein and Rorty and, you know, he doesn't belong there. He belongs with Eckhart Tolle. Well, no, and that's part of, I guess, if there's an argument or something that I have, it's Watts belongs in the in-group. Marginal, yes, but not outside the circle. Like, I mean, I want nothing to do with Tolle and Chopra and you know.
Yeah, no, for sure. Although there is that mingling, that commingling of the Watts group that we're talking about here with the Chopras. I mean, I'm not saying Watts and Chopra got together, but certainly another member of this margin haunting enterprise that we'll talk about the next time, Rupert Sheldrake, he certainly has mingled with Deepak.
Hello, I'm Rupert Sheldrake. I've found myself that sometimes when I look at people and they turn around, they look straight at me.
So, I mean, it's an interesting thing because in some ways it's like while they're not accepted into the mainstream, some of them turn in their own direction, but some turn towards the Chopras, the Tolles, because they're the only people who want to like listen to them. Watts. Let's talk about Watts.
So the super brief, like just, Wikipedia level biographical details. He was born in 1915, died in 1973. Pretty young. Apparently, they say, and another thing that I like about these people is that he was mostly autodidactic in his education. I mean, he was born to apparently a tire salesman and a homemaker, it says.
Yeah.
So just a pretty basic, poor, unconnected upbringing.
Yeah, inauspicious beginnings.
And then they talk about this, where he sort of made it famous, right, is when he was at the radio station at Berkeley and had a show. And when I was reading about that, I was like, holy shit, he was podcasting, basically.
Yeah.
It was it wasn't paid. It was just this volunteer thing. He's like, I can get behind a mic and broadcast some thoughts to the people in my area. I'm like, he was an early goddamn podcaster.
Got in before there was $100 million in value for him. Sorry.
Yeah, geez, you remember the old days when we used to make fun of Joe Rogan? Now, he's 100 millionaire.
It made me think, like, can you imagine how long it takes to make $100 million? To have $100 million to invest in something that's bullshit?
Podcasting news.
Joe Spotify.
Anyway, who gives a shit?
Podcasters.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And then I liked this part where they said that he engaged in this lifestyle at the Druid Heights or whatever, where they live in shared bohemian poverty. And just everybody, that we garden our own food and we carpenter our own dwellings and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much what America is nowadays, minus the bohemianism.
Exactly.
We're all just clunking along in our shared poverty.
Fuck.
Drinking our poor man's revenge and whining about what the man has done to us. And goddamn.
God fucking damn. Oh.
And he sort of apparently, but then he was this sort of bridge figure between religion and science, or between this and that he was constructing viewpoints that attempted to unify and appeal to both sides of various divides.
Okay.
Which, if you can pull it off, is a laudable enough goal, right?
It's interesting. He was as could be heard at the beginning of this episode. He had fantastic speaker. He just had a great, almost musicality. However, I do detect the dramatic pause at times in his speaking. And I know that, and I know we've done a lot of tangents and off-roading here, but like whenever I hear it, now all I ever fucking think about is this goddamn stupid Sam Harris.
For a few years there, I was someone who had a lot of ideas and didn't have anything to do with them.
With his like extra long pauses of like, do you get it, dumbass? You know, that whole thing. Whereas with fucking Alan Watts, it wasn't intended to be that way. It was more of a, you know, let it sink in. But anyway, Harris always has those eyes where he's just like, you know, like, oh, come on. Can't believe I have to speak to you idiots. Anyway, okay.
Everybody's here tonight. Everybody from Joe Rogan to Jordan Peterson to Sam Harris. We all showed up to the Alan Watts party.
Yeah, well, there you go. Of course, why wouldn't we, right?
The original Margin Haunter. No, the original Margin Haunter, like you brought up another week, was probably Socrates. But an old school Margin Haunter.
Yeah, there you go.
Was evoked by... So let's get... Okay, I want to get into some of the stuff where... What are these ideas that Watts has that are so radical and taboo, and they're going to push him out to the fringes? One of them is that he is explicitly, repeatedly anti-self-improvement, anti-quote-unquote virtue, and completely cultural relativist morality ethics.
Yep.
Which I think is itself one of the major... He ticks off most of the major ones. So if you are non-dogmatic... That's a major one. If you don't believe in explicit, strict father morality of some stripe or another, you're out on the outs. And if you are anti-capitalist. And he does all of those in this one particular... I think it's a collection of different lectures, but was organized by someone into this collection called The Essential Alan Watts. Track one of which is called Mind Over Mind. That's where we're going to get the audio clips that I will soon be playing. And he ticks off all of those. And I was like, who else does those three things? And he reminded me of somebody. Oh, yeah. Oh, good old Fred Nietzsche. And when in this one, Watts was talking about beware virtue and those who say they want to improve you or they want you to improve yourself. And I was like, oh, that's a chapter title in Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols, where he writes about the quote-unquote improvers of mankind.
One knows my demand of philosophers that they place themselves beyond good and evil, that there are no moral facts whatever. Moral judgment never contains anything but nonsense,
etc. So, like, and that's what Nietzsche makes of these moralists and these whether it's coming from religion or coming from Aristotle, whoever's like, you need to figure out how to be a better version of you or a better version of man itself, of the category you're supposed to be a member of. I'm going to play a little bit of this Watts on that topic, and then we can talk about that.
So therefore, beware of virtue. Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, said, the highest virtue is not virtue, and therefore really is virtue. But inferior virtue cannot let go of being virtuous, and therefore is not virtue. Translated in more of a periphrastic way, the highest virtue is not conscious of itself as virtue, and therefore really is virtue. Lower virtue is so self-conscious that it's not virtue. In other words, when you breathe, you don't congratulate yourself on being virtuous. But breathing is a great virtue. It's living. When you come out with beautiful eyes, blue or brown or green as the case may be, you don't congratulate yourself for having grown one of the most fabulous jewels on earth. So it's just eyes, and you don't account it a virtue. to see, to entertain the miracles of color and form. You say, oh, that's just... But that's real virtue. Virtue in the sense, the old sense of the word, as strength, as when we talk about the healing virtue of a plant. That's real virtue. But the other virtues are stuck on. They're ersatz, they're imitation virtues. And they usually create trouble. Because more diabolical things are done in the name of righteousness. And be assured that everybody of whatever nationality or political frame of mind or religion always goes to war with a sense of complete rightness. The other side is the devil.
So there's that thing about, everybody who's going to war and doing what they want thinks they're right to do so. And then I'll add...
We could have a plague of virtuous people. Do you realize that? Any animal considered in itself is virtuous. It does its thing. But in crowds, they're awful. Like a crowd of ants or locusts on the rampage. They're all perfectly good animals, but there's just too much. I could imagine a perfectly pestiferous mass of 1 million saints.
So, I really like that concept, that every animal or every type or whatever is just fine if you've got one grasshopper. But you get too many, and then there's a plague. And so the same for the conquistadors of the Inquisition, right? If you've got too many people that are all acting in the will of God and all think that they're so virtuous and perfect, they'll be willing to do anything.
Yeah, for sure. They'd be willing to eat each other. Like the locusts do when the grasshoppers become too many and they morph into a locust, and the whole reason why they keep moving is because if they don't, the ones behind them will eat their legs off or whatever. Anyway, as the analogy would continue on, I think they don't have someone else to eat, like the conquistadors don't have the poor Native Americans, then they'll go against each other, right? If they don't have an other. He talks a lot about do-gooders and how do-gooders are trouble or whatever. And I just love that.
Yeah.
I just was like, yep, goddamn, they're trouble because they have something to uphold, and they do it a lot together. Then it's all of a sudden, I know this is going to sound controversial, but it's like clapping for the healthcare professionals or whatever. It's like, what else are they able to be made to do? It's that kind of thing, like in the name of something that's right, that kind of thing. It just kind of, that's what it's off-putting about it, is that everybody just like falls in line.
Yep. It's going to be controversial. Well, that's what we're here for.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's super strongly playing itself out right now with the social response to the coronavirus epidemic experience episode, with the slogan that one sees everywhere nowadays: stay home, save lives. And all of the people who get to recline on their American rear ends, and by doing so, pat themselves on the back and say, I am a hero. I am quite literally the fireman running into the towers on 9/11. I am a life-saving hero by watching some more Netflix. And how convenient and perfect is it for the ruling class to be able to use that rhetorical trick to get what they want, get people to do what they want. Oh, you're all heroes if you just do this,
Yeah.
And the self-righteousness with which these people present themselves, and I'm just thinking, first of all, you're ignorant of what science even says, and second of all, you're selective about where you care about science and where you don't. But they are happy to tell you exactly how you ought to behave right now, how they're going to behave, why it makes them virtuous, and how you must also.
So it makes me think, okay, stay home, stay safe. The reason behind that is, go ahead and make sure that you don't go out and get coronavirus, because that if a whole bunch of people get it, then we're going to not have enough ICU beds and all that business. We don't have enough PPE and all that kind of stuff. And then now that you're in your house and people are starting to go, can we go out now? Because, we flattened the curve or whatever it was. Then it becomes, well, let's just stay until we find a cure, or whatever. Like it can kind of like move along and, and then, if I don't know how long that can last, they might have to get a little more creative than just, telling you to feel like you're a hero, telling you that you are a hero if you stay home or whatever, just like the 9/11 first responders. But anyway, it's just kind of, that sort of seems like the next thing that seemed to be going on in the news was just, of course, I don't think that's happening though. I think people are opening up a little bit more states anyway.
Now we can all be do-gooders. But, they're the whole shifting the goalpost thing.
Yeah, shifting the goalposts.
We're instituting the lockdowns to flatten the curve. When do you hear that anymore? It's no longer about that. Now it's about making 0 deaths or something insane that's not going to happen. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nietzsche, Watts, and apparently the two of us, at least I, seem to totally be on board with this concept of virtue is actively dangerous and negative because no one has sufficient grounds to claim to know what is virtuous or if what they're doing is succeeding. But claims of virtue can undergird and motivate the most quote-unquote evil or atrocious or selfish or totalitarian. It can motivate all human behavior if you can only say, well, God told me to do it, or some version thereof.
Yeah.
It's the right thing to do. People will do anything if they can follow it up with, well, it was the right thing to do.
Or,
and that's dangerous.
This is the high moral ground. This is the high ground for morality. He mentions the Spanish Inquisition, I think, particularly with this topic on virtue. And of course, there's the whole virtue signaling thing in social media and probably in person, but certainly it gets recorded in social media.
But for me, in my opinion, that is violating one of the top 5, at least, taboos of central Western civilization. We are supposed to pursue the virtue, right? That which is right. That's what we should want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're supposed to. I mean, there's lots of explanations for why virtue might be this thing in culture, but collectively, I think, but individually, it can be very painful, I think, because there's always the threat of excommunication, of exile, right? That's the threat. So if you don't toe the line, you can be kicked out. And we're social creatures. Not everyone is well suited to being on their own, or at least at the start. They may not know how to learn how to be on their own. I mean, just look at all the people who are in solitary confinement. Of course, that's a sort of a different environment. It's one thing to be alone in the forest than it is to be alone in a dark cell where you can't see anything. But in general,
Yep.
So that's the threat of virtue, I suppose, is that if you do not join us, then you will be excommunicated. I think that's the extreme to which we take it in our heads. just in general. Just even in like the school cliques, it's like, oh, if I don't fall in line with this clique, then I won't be able to really be part of it or whatever. And even if I do try and fall in line, they may pick on me still just to kind of initiate me into the group or whatever. I don't know. There's a lot of fear. I think whenever listening to him, I think about the root of a lot of it just being fear, just like a crazy fear too.
Yeah, fear and I don't know if this is an and, as though they're different things, or if what I'm about to say is a subset included in fear. But I think this is an aspect of that most deeply rooted human tendency to avoid responsibility for your own choices and behaviors if you can offload it on, well, somebody told me what's right, or somebody told me what's in fashion, in like the click example, or, this is how. You don't have to face the bevy of choices available to you and select amongst them, and it's your fault what happens. Because, well, I just did it because Sue told me that's what was cool. Or I just did it because my priest told me not doing so was sinful, or what, Everybody wants to offload responsibility to society.
Yeah. There's the cliched parental statement that gets bandied about, I'm sure, enough, but would you jump off a cliff if they told you to, like that kind of thing. Or, well, I'm not Bobby's mother. If he stays up at night, that, whatever it is, that, but Bobby gets to do, I don't, like it's that, yeah.
We don't decide when to open up. The virus decides.
Well, I mean, so the responsibility thing, I don't get a lot of that from Alan Watts, though. I mean, I see him leveling a heavy critique, and you and I kind of going off about responsibility.
Well,
what do you think?
Maybe. Let's see if this next clip has anything more to say about that.
Okay.
You say, well, I ought to be honest. That's the beginning of, so many lies you can't imagine. It's like when I hear a lot said about love, the big love thing on the way. Everybody's got to love everybody. But he sings songs about love. Do you know what I do? I buy a gun and bar my door, because I know there's a storm of hypocrisy brewing. Let's supposing we can't do anything to change ourselves. Now that is the worst thing an American audience can hear. There's no way of improving yourself, because every kind of culture in this country is dedicated to self-improvement. Just take jogging, that deplorable practice. It's a very nice thing to run and to go dancing across the hills at a fast speed. But these joggers, like, shaking their bones and rattling their brains, running on their heels, and because there's a grimness about it, it's determinately good for you. See? Why do you go to school? There's only one reason for going to school. And that is that somebody's got something here, whether it's a professor or a library, that you want to find out. But the whole point of coming to school is that you're interested in something. You don't come to improve yourself. But the trouble is that the schools got the wrong idea. They gave people honors for learning. And the reward for studying French should be the ability to speak French and enjoy reading French and having fun with French people. But when you get a degree for it, then the degree becomes the point. It's instructive to go to a professional professor's meeting. In my field, which is philosophy, you go to a congress of philosophers, and you'll find when they all get together in the bar or in the restaurant in somebody's room, the one thing they don't talk about is philosophy. It is very bad form indeed to show interest in philosophy among your colleagues. The same is exactly true in clergy gatherings. They don't talk about religion. What they both talk about is politics. Church politics and academic politics. Because it's bad form to be brilliant on a faculty, because it outclasses your colleagues. Therefore, faculty people tend to cultivate a studied mediocrity.
We start in that one with him going after honesty and love and virtue. And it's like, okay, this is so fun and great. Like, how many taboos can we violate at the same time? So that's part of why I was thinking that was relevant to what you were just saying. Be honest is an example, and there's a lot, and I'm not saying I'm anti-honesty either, but I'm anti-dogmatism. And if you're dogmatic even about virtues, that is to be avoided, I think. Well, I know exactly what I have to do here. I have to tell the truth, because honesty is the best policy, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or, well, I need to go around and act from love, because love is the foundation of all goodness, and I need to do that which... And Watts's response literally to that was, I reach for my gun, or whatever. Because here comes a bunch of hypocrisy. And I think there's a lot to that. That when people engage from a standpoint of these virtues, of these institutions that they set aside, they put on the pedestal, and they say, you know, thou shalt be honest, or whatever. And you can come up with many examples from our daily lives when you're like, yeah, well, what about if your 3-year-old says, do you think my dress is pretty, or whatever? And obviously, we don't think that. But, you know, everybody lies all the time. And then towards the end of that clip, we get into kind of the next topic, which is how I think Watts is kind of the philosopher of the Dawdler. But while we're on this, do you want to talk more about it?
Well, I'm just still, I just don't know where it went with the responsibility thing.
I'm saying that using these universals as behavior guides is avoidance of taking responsibility for your own speech acts, etc. In the daughter dress case or whatever. And I think that Watts agrees with that because of what he was willing to say right there, like even going after things like honesty and love. Those can be used or misused, perhaps, if we want to take an evaluative term and apply it to that, as ways to avoid being responsible for your behavior. Well, I was just being honest. Is a dodge.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Yeah, no, for sure. I just wonder if that's what he meant by it. But
okay, do you have an alternative interpretation or not really? But
I figured that a part of this was, to an extent, don't let people hold shit over your head because they don't have anything over you, you know? They can't use love and virtue and honesty because the context is important, you know? And that's kind of what that's what I tend to get out of something like that is, you know, no one's better than you. Like, you know, and that's what they're using. It seems to me like all of this virtue discussion, it's about leverage in social settings, you know, and it could be hierarchical where you have the people in power and they're trying to leverage people to do what they want them to do. Or it could just be something that just naturally kind of erupts or emerges in social settings between people to kind of keep everybody in line or whatever, because If someone's not doing, the thing that you want them to do, then you can't trust them, right? And it's just a weird place to be if you're trying to get something done as a group or whatever, because you fear there's not going to be enough food. Like, everybody pick up the spear and hunt. If you don't, the gods will punish you, or whatever it is. Whatever it is you need to use as leverage. And I thought he was just sort of throwing a wrench in that whole thing, just being like, it's all bullshit. They're trying to leverage something against you. Don't let them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree that he probably would think and say those things also. And yeah, this could be just me importing my own stuff into what he was saying more than it is really there.
Well, the reason why I say that is because the shit that I was reading, I wouldn't say that they were like the best sources. I have no idea. But there was a hinting that, he might have incorporated this self-improvement as hogwash into his own life and just behaved that way. And didn't take, however we haven't defined what responsibility is supposed to be. But like, he wouldn't have been very responsible in his behaviors towards, the ones who were close to him, And so that's as I understand it, that he was not a great husband, and things like that, and he had lots of affairs, and it tended to be rolling one. A woman he was having an affair on with his first wife became his second wife. And then it's just kind of like when people would confront him on things like his affairs or his alcohol abuse or whatever it was, he'd say, it's just the way I am. It's because that's another part, I thought, of the non-self-improvement, was that then you're fine just the way you are. Don't let anyone tell you you're not. You're fine. But there's also really nothing you can do to really change that. You were born with these blue eyes, these beautiful jewels. It's not a virtue you can laud over anyone. That's all I was thinking. Maybe it's in his own life has been incorporated. And so this responsibility thing, that's where I was coming from, was I was thinking of the little things that I had read. I was like, well, what if What if you, Harlan, take it further than Watts does? Which I prefer. I like that. I like the responsibility thing myself. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could be wrong, but that's just my general understanding.
We can perhaps circle back to this when we get to the second half and we talk about the first, and you're like, oh, we're only half done. Fucking sit down. You got nowhere to go. If you leave the house, they're going to arrest you anyways.
You hear that,
people? You're in Portland.
You fucking sit down.
You can't leave the house. Stay there. And we're talking about this lecture first, and then later we're going to talk about the book on the taboo against knowing who you are. And we'll talk about what Watts, at least in this hyper-intellectualized segment of life, while he's writing this book, what he thinks each of us is, and maybe that'll have some bearing on the responsibility thing.
Cool.
And then my other comment about that is I know almost nothing about Alan Watts personally, or like I didn't even know the story about the affairs and whatever, and I don't know. You in general seem more interested in the person, and I typically am more interested in the person's presentations of the ideas or whatever.
Well, yeah, and
I don't know much.
And in a way, that's I think the usual Dawdler's approach is the ideas, and who fucking cares about the people? But these people are not in the mainstream, and so that's why I'm like, okay, what do we have available to us to be able to evaluate, why they're on the margins? Because everything, everything checks off, and so that's where I start to ask, okay, that's what haunting the margins is, sort of a little more of a greater emphasis on the person in my thinking, because it's like one of the ways you can evaluate why maybe they became more of a margin hunter. haunter, because maybe they, maybe because some of them you could literally, I think, make an argument that they didn't care to be in the mainstream. Like they enjoyed being at the margins, and it was more fun or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and for others, it's like the next one we'll do with Rupert Sheldrake. I think he kind of wants to be in the center, you know? And so they have different motivations.
From the tiny amount that I know about Watts, wiki level stuff, he seems to be the opposite of if Sheldrake wants to be in the center, I think Watts wants to be on the margins. He had a gig as an adjunct or whatever at Harvard for a while, but kind of like turned it down, right? Or what? Yeah. He seems
against the whole, you know, status quo, because I think he's come to the conclusion or learned that the status quo is not helping. It's not, and he doesn't want to be part of that, right? He was part of the Episcopalian Church, and while there may have been some personal reasons why that became an issue or why he no longer was part of it, it may have also been just his philosophy, his view of things, and they were just like, this isn't working, man. Like, we are Episcopalians, we do our Episcopalian shit, and you're all about Buddhism and stuff. You know, like, you know, it's and so he just wasn't. And so I mean, I don't know if I would love to read his autobiography and his biography, but I kind of wonder if he really did suffer much from that anyway. You know, autodidact, you know, he strikes me as somebody who's just doing fine on his own. You know, just especially when you hear him talk, it's like, this doesn't sound like a man who's been like uber troubled, you know, by rejection, or, you know what I mean? Like he does his thing, sort of in a way very similar to Raw, you know, just I'm gonna do my thing. And
are you the second part is what I'm saying. This is where it's approaching what I think that he's philosophizing the Dawdle here.
Cool.
When he talks about, when he compares frolicking across the meadow to jogging, right? To me, jogging is the hustle. It is, in his terms, it has been determined that this is quote unquote good for me, and I shall do it. I'm going to get up every morning at 6 o'clock and I'm going to run 5 miles, you know, because I'm a hustler and this is what's good. And Watts's version is, well, I'm not anti-running. Running's fine. I'll run across the field of wildflowers with you. But it's not
Shin
this...
splits! Sorry.
Part of it, I think, is an emphasis on, like, do it for its own sake versus do it for the sake of some predetermined virtuosic goal or something. And then he goes from that into the whole schooling thing, where wouldn't it be nice if more people had the purpose of going to school to get educated instead of to get a degree, to get the piece of paper? Those are the sort of hustler goals. I need to become accredited by my society so that I can show someone else in a position of power that I have achieved this degree. He's like, well, no, you want to go to school for French so that you can speak French fluently, enjoy French literature, talk to French people, have a good time.
Yeah.
You should just want to learn French. You shouldn't want to get a certificate that says, I am a French speaker, or like, I have graduated from this institution.
Right, and that's totally, I can totally see how, in that summation, how that becomes this great source of frustration and anxiety and despair in people, because they're like, well, I've got to go be a professor of French at the whatever university, and there's only so many jobs, and it's like, oh, why did I do this? I wasted my life learning French. And someone like Alan Watts might be like, but why did you do it then? Like, did you not enjoy it? Did you not want to do it at one point? Why is it you've lost your way, you know? It wasn't for the goal of becoming a tenured professor in French or whatever. You know, I had to settle for being an interpreter at the UN or whatever, or translator. I don't know, something like that.
Doing business such as manufacturing clothes is a very good thing to do. I could conceive that it would be extremely enjoyable, something one could be very proud of, to make good clothes. Of course you need to sell them because you need to eat. But to make clothes to make money raises another question. Because then your interest is not in making clothes, it's in making money, and then you're going to cheat on the clothes.
So then we loop in the anti-capitalism into the prefer the dawdling to the hustling.
Yeah.
And we just want it. It seems as though we'd probably be better at achieving the relevant goals if we valued and pursued their fruition rather than, oh, I make clothes to make money. Like, if you just wanted to make good clothes, and so then you get sweatshops, right? And you get Phil Knight, and you get all the jobs in Portland.
Yeah.
Because it's not about making clothes, it's about making money. And then almost everything in our society becomes in that machine. It's not about doing the thing, it's about making money from the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think about the idea that, I mean, I don't know how perfectly aligned it all is, but this notion that at one time there were research and development labs because, businesses, they couldn't monopolize or merge companies or acquire other companies at one time in, say, the United States. So they had to develop their own ideas and stuff like that. And so there was this boon for creative thinking and trying to work things out. And there was a place, I guess, in that sense for people who went and, desired education and whatnot. But the structure behind the society was allowing that to happen, It's allowing people to kind of go, oh, the Shannon, or what's his name? God damn it, why can't I think of his name? Claude.
Yeah, Claude Shannon.
Claude Shannon. His work likely couldn't have happened if it weren't for, healthy research and development enterprises and sort of the, antitrust laws and things like that were going into place. And so people couldn't offload the work onto some other little company that was doing it or whatever, because they just bought them or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and there was a lot more of a prospering of new ideas and things like that. I was reading about this one guy who used to work for the military. I don't know if he always did, but they were trying to at one point the military was like, or the Navy or whoever, they were like, all right, you've got to justify your existence because all you do is screw around in the lab and you just have fun and you're just like a fucking scientist who just, we don't even know what you care about or whatever. So this guy came up with somehow he was able to marry the idea of trying to figure out how chaotic systems can synchronize by trying to see how that would work in a cryptic messaging or whatever, so that you could mask the actual message underneath. But it was this real authentic intellectual problem that he was trying to solve, and he justified it by saying yeah, we can talk to each other and the Germans won't ever, whatever. Mm-hmm. And that was all, of course, kind of accidental, not really the R&D thing, but it was definitely there to sort of help support the notion that you can't just go around. I mean, there are different motivations for why they didn't want people merging and acquiring different companies and stuff like that. But it's just happened to be a nice experiment in what I think maybe Watts is talking about to an extent, which is that when you pursue things just to pursue them for the love of it or whatever, it just seems like a lot more, I don't know, the word I can't, progress is the word I'm thinking, but I mean, not, it's the word that's coming up, but you make a lot more progress or headway. You develop things a lot more, and not only do you learn very much, a whole lot about them, but then you actually see what the envelope is and you start to push it. But we can't do that when the whole point of the whole game is to make money, and then all of a sudden everybody, well, you don't do that. We'll get this, we bought this person. He does the statistics, it's that kind of thing. It's like everybody's bought and sold and they are supposed to perform.
It's part of the mythos of capitalism that it encourages innovation, right? And remembering back all the way to episode 0.
Oh, shit.
And comparing the Dawdle to the hustle and whatnot, I'm not at all convinced yet that, because capitalism is a subtype of hustling, and it's this having an external measurement stick and goal, that you know what you're worth because you know how many dollars you have, and you want to have dollars because they allow you to accumulate social status and hedonistic fulfillment,
power,
and exert power over others. And all these you get all these goodies if you just get the bucks. But I don't see it. Yeah, I don't know that capitalism encourages innovation, or at least not of an interesting kind. It's not radical enough. You can come up with a better widget than the other guy's widget, but you aren't going to be inspired or motivated to come up with something entirely new. And this is another thing that Watts talks about in that lecture, how the genius is always, and by definition, misunderstood and incomprehensible because they're coming up with something new.
Well,
when Einstein first came up with relativity or whatever as the, fulfilling his capitalist drudgery as a
patent clerk,
a patent clerk, that he comes up with this thing and people are like, what? I don't get it. And it takes a long time. But he wasn't paid to come up with relativity. He does that in his Dawdle time.
Oh, for sure. No, for sure. But one of the things that I think is interesting or perhaps remarkable of the human spirit is that when all of these so the whole thing about the R&D thing, and then also I don't remember the name of the building at MIT, but it was the same place where the linguistics department was at, or at least the branch that Chomsky was kind of leading or whatever, but a whole bunch of different physics and departments or wings or branches or whatever of it were going on. And it was just this temporary crap ass building while they built this new one or whatever. But what ended up happening was people ended up just staying in this space. And it's kind of like when you keep the capitalistic type of social restraints at bay, then it's amazing how quickly the weeds blossom, how everything just kind of comes right back, as if almost that was the natural state, was the, innovate, just screw around, just constantly, screw around. And so that building ended up generating a bunch of Nobel laureates and all that kind of stuff, or Nobel Prize winners and stuff, because there really wasn't any rules. Apparently some people would just for one experiment, I'm sure I've mentioned this to you in passing before, but somebody needed more space for their laser or whatever, so they just literally cut a hole in the floor, and they're just this thing came to thud in another department's lounge or what. The guy's sorry, but I need more space. And everyone's okay, whatever. And so they were just allowed to they had elbow room. They could kind of stretch out. But when the whole point is just money and just, whatever, the innovation becomes just a buzzword, and everybody's basically making the same thing everybody else is. And it just comes down to marketing and advertising and all that kind of crap. Anyway, gotten away from Alan a little bit here, but basically that's kind of what I was thinking. It's just you give it a little bit of space and it might just explode.
Yeah, us Dawdlers need to pursue our projects in an environment of shared bohemian poverty.
Yes.
And cut holes in the floor / ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, if the UBI is like $2,000 a month, I could do that. I wouldn't ask for more. If I wanted to go someplace, I would just save it, and I would cut back on certain things that, you know what I mean? Like that's how I would go to whatever, wherever it was that I was thinking would be important to go to with my family. And they would love to go where I want to go. Anyway.
Let's see if this part has something to do with the responsibility.
So here's the situation, you see. There is no, the whole idea of self-improvement is a will-o'-the-wisp and a hoax. That's not what it's about. Let's begin where we are. What happens if you know beyond any shadow of doubt that there is nothing you can do to be better? Well, it's kind of a relief, isn't it? Now, you say, well, now what will I do? See, there's a little fidget comes up. Because we're so used to making things better, leave the world a better place than when you found it sort of thing. I want to be of service to other people and all these dreadfully hazy ideas. And so we think there's that little itch still. But supposing instead of that, seeing that there isn't really anything we can do to improve ourselves or to improve the world, if we realize that that is so, it gives us a breather in the course of which we may simply watch what is going on. Watch what happens.
I guess maybe that almost perfectly encapsulates what you were trying to say, that his position is, right? So he sets up the problematic. All right, if we take away the improvers of mankind, and your job is no longer do what you ought to do, but instead exercise your radical freedom, Sartre, etc., and it's up to you. Like, go forth and do now. And that's where I'm saying this whole responsibility thing existentially weighs down upon us. But Watts is saying instead, just watch it, or what, like just let it happen or something. I don't.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you were saying the difference is?
Yeah. Like I just kind of get the sense that there is a sort of, I don't know, to an extent, a somewhat hedonistic conclusion. And, you know, it's funny. I don't think that's the only place one needs to take what he has to say. I just, because we were talking about capitalism, and I'm like, talk about a hedonistic conclusion. But that's sort of, I guess, the thought that I was having. But again, I don't want to like act like I'm a fucking read all of the Watts books and did it, you know what I mean? Like, so yeah. I just, my impression.
So could we look at things in that way? Without, as it were, fixing labels and names and gradations and judgments on everything, but watch what happens. Watch what we do. Now, you see, if you do that, you do at least give yourself a chance. And it may be that when you are in this way freed from busybodiness and being out to improve everything, that your own nature will begin to take care of itself. Because you're not getting in the way of yourself all the time. You will begin to find out that the great things that you do are really happenings. For example, no great genius can explain how he does it. Yes, he says, I have learned a technique to express myself. Because I had something in me that had to come out, I had to know how to give it out.
Anyways, yeah. When he talked about that part, it reminded me of the way David Lynch talks about his art. He will often get asked questions about the social impact of something, or about some, oh yeah, how does Mulholland Drive be a commentary about female empowerment in America or whatever. And almost invariably his answer to those types of questions will be, no, I can't talk to you about that at all. That's not what it was about. I don't know. That's not what I'm doing.
Right.
All I'm doing is I get an idea, and I'm just trying to express that idea to, like, I'm trying to stay true to that idea, and that's how I make my films. I get an idea he makes an analogy with fishing. I go into my transcendental meditation or whatever the fuck he's into, and I'll go down into this sea of unbounded consciousness, and once in a while I'll catch a fish, and that'll be my idea, and then I'll just need to put the fish in the percolator, and boom, then I can make something.
And ideas come to us. We don't really create an idea. We just catch them, like fish. No chef ever takes credit for making the fish. It's just preparing the fish. So you get an idea, and it is like a seed.
And that, to me, sounds like what Watts was saying there about geniuses, how they get the whatever it is, inspiration, epiphanies, and they can work through it, but there's no way to teach it. It has to happen.
Yeah.
You have to not pursue and let certain things happen, and then, I don't know.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. You can't bottle it, but I mean, I have my thoughts about why that would potentially be, but I mean, it just...
You want to share one of those thoughts?
I mean, my thinking is that it's the confluence of a whole bunch of different factors that come into play. Have to do with someone's development. That has to do with the context that they lived in at the time. Has to do with perhaps something that they, some batteries included, some stuff that's baked in the cake. It's just a whole mess of shit, and it's really hard to recreate that because there's so many moving pieces. I think that's one very blah, kind of boring explanation of it, but that seems as good as any as far as I'm concerned. It just happens because it is what it is. Alan Watts may be an example of that, right? I mean, dad was a tire salesman or whatever the fuck, and it's like, who knows? It's then later on in life you get some opportunities to kind of relax and express yourself or not. The story of Einstein, you mentioned him earlier. I mean, it seems very much inauspicious beginnings as well. He just happens to, go crazy when he holds a compass in his hand, and he's just freaking out, and it's like, why him and not another, member of the family, and it's like, it just is.
What you were just saying, since apparently tonight is like everybody comes to the party, yeah. That comment loops in the Santa Fe Institute crowd and the Edge of Chaos type stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
There's so much going on that you can't predict what's going to happen. You can't explain where it's going to come from. You can't replicate it. And most of it is too crazy to count. But if you can get right on this edge,
yep,
right in this margin, that's where the action happens.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's totally it. There has to be some special circumstances in today's world, I think, to have that happen. But in the past, maybe there hasn't always had to be. Maybe the margin was a little bit wider, or whatever I'm trying to say. You know.
Oh, that reminds me. And again, you know, the coming to the party is Stuart Kaufman marginal or regular episode?
That's so hard to say. He's definitely hard.
Yeah, I kind of want to put him in a margin episode. Anyway, after Sheldrake.
After
Stuart
Sheldrake.
Kaufman. All right.
Yeah, Stuart. Well, Stuart Kaufman, and I was saying this earlier, I kind of feel the same way about Stephen Jay Gould. Stephen Jay Gould and Stuart Kaufman's like this too. It just so happens that a lot of Kaufman's stuff, his NK model, works, and people really, we can do stuff with it. And I sometimes wonder if that's just for many of these people, that's the difference.
I think it's gobbledygook. Could be right, but I still think it's gobbledygook.
It's that, we were just able to figure this thing out or whatever. Because even though, for instance, punctuated equilibria was primarily a quote-unquote rediscovery of sorts by Niles Eldredge, Gould was the one who made it popular, primarily through his writing.
There's nothing more widely discussed among baseball fans than the disappearance of 400 hitting.
And he buddied up with Niles Eldredge on the initial paper or whatever it was. But people really didn't like it, But after a while, they were having a very difficult time getting it out of the way. It just kept coming back. And the same thing with, Kaufman. It's just, you can't, the personalities may not rub you the right way, but it's really hard to say, fuck off. However, I would say the difference between, as far as I can tell, Kaufman and Gould, I don't know how much humor they had. I mean, they could be funny, but were they, you know what I mean? How, it wasn't Robert Anton Wilson humor. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So there's going to be degrees, I suppose, within that. And of course, in a way, both those two happen to be established compared to fucking, Alan Watts wandering the lecture halls, just, fucking going around, whatever. So.
Well, after these three, they were my paradigm trio of margin haunters. Wilson, McKenna, and Watson. But it'll evolve where it goes from here. So, what is the problem? What's the self? What's the idea? What is, you just have to watch and let it happen and whatever. What? And who is this that's supposedly doing it? So I want to talk a little bit about one of Watt's books called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. And on page X, on page 9 of the preface, he writes, "The thesis is..." How convenient of him to do that for us.
"The prevalent sensation of oneself as a separate ego enclosed in a bag of skin is a hallucination."
And what he's going to get to throughout this book, I think, is the same thing expressed by Joseph Campbell, who also was at this party already, in the title of one of his books, "Thou Art That." This radical holism that each of us is nothing other, the objects that are called each of us, is not, so step one is, you can't talk about an organism removed from its environment. You have to talk about organism within environment. That's kind of the Korzybskian step, and another reason to like Alan Watts is he was a general semantics practitioner. But then Watts goes even further than that, and it's like, no, you can't even really, or you shouldn't, conceive of it ultimately, even on that level, but that it's all one thing. Not only is everything in everything else, everything is everything else. There is just the one, which I think we talked about a little bit, at least during the Hofstadter one, who also, I think, is an interesting margin case. He falls a little bit on the other side of the line,
He does.
Not a margin haunter, but he's closer than many that we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways. All right. Watts.
We suffer from a hallucination, a false and distorted sensation of our own existence that I myself is a separate center of feeling and action, bounded by the physical body, a center which, quote-unquote, confronts an, quote-unquote, external world, a universe both alien and strange, gives us a feeling of being a lonely and very temporary visitor in the universe.
So diagnosing this problem that most of us have nowadays, the alienation and individualism, loneliness, and existential angst.
Mm-hmm.
And his way out of it is going to be this whole, don't worry about it. You already are that.
The secret and profound view on life is... ...
Like already, who isn't perked up at that shit?
The secret and profound view on life is that our normal sensation of self is a hoax, a temporary role that we are playing, have been conned into playing with tacit consent, just as every hypnotized person is basically willing to be hypnotized. The most strongly enforced of all known taboos is the taboo against knowing who or what you really are behind the mask of your apparently separate, independent, isolated ego.
Oh, you tease. He said he was going to give us the secret, but all he gave us was another restatement of the problem.
So why the book? Simply that it is a part of things taking their course that I write. As a human being, it is just my nature to enjoy and share philosophy. I do this in the same way that some birds are eagles, some doves. Some flowers lilies, and some roses.
Yeah.
So that's back to the same lesson that he said during part of the clips from the audio about you don't congratulate yourself for growing an eye, right? EYE.
Yeah.
It's just the way things develop. In that paragraph, he's saying, well, it's just the way it is. I write. Nothing to it. You don't have to give me any fancy credit.
It's just the way I am. I drink, smoke, I have extramarital affairs, or whatever.
I see. Okay, a way to avoid responsibility. Even perhaps he falls
potentially
awry of that one. I don't know.
But that may not be the right interpretation. I just,
Yeah. So where does this thing come from? We're under this big illusion. Why are we? Quote,
what governs what we choose to notice is whatever seems advantageous or disadvantageous for our survival, our social status, and the security of our ego. The pattern and the logic of all the notation symbols which we have learned from our culture.
So we've got the chimp, the human, and the ego, right in there. What we evolved to care about, what we have been convinced by the high school cliques to care about, and what the English language, what Zizek would call the big other, what Lacan calls the big other, has the symbolic order, has convinced us is important. What is Watts talking about when he's like, you can't improve yourself?
Change is, in some sense, an illusion, for we are always at the point where our future can take us.
And this is another kind of Nietzschean refrain about where Nietzsche did it as the eternal return and stuff. Watts says,
it is, I suppose, my basic metaphysical axiom, my leap of faith, that what happened once can always happen again.
I don't exactly know how to interpret that. We could maybe pause there to talk about it for a minute if you have any thoughts. I bother to highlight it because he does explicitly say, this is my basic axiom and my leap of faith.
Yeah.
What the heck does what happened once can always happen again mean?
Well, I'm trying to fit my head into his framework of wholeness, you know, of you already are whatever it is, you know. That cyclical nature, or that things feeding into themselves, you know, it's like, you know, you aren't this raw individual nugget. You are part of the larger part. It's almost like fractal, right? It's like, you know, that I guess that's kind of what it sounds like. He's trying to say that things are embedded in each other. Like everything's just sort of, I don't know, sort of fractal in that way. And that would be the repetitiveness, potentially. That what can happen will happen again. That the pattern, the structure is all one and the same. No matter how you try and discretize it. I don't know if I'm in the right spot.
Yeah, I think I don't either, but I sort of like it.
Well,
so if I mean, to take the fractal analogy, anything that happens in you, or what we would call inside your skin bag, psychologically, such as your extreme grief at the death of your mother or something, can be in some sense recapitulated
right
externally by a culture, a society, a planet, a galaxy, a universe, whatever, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's all one and the same. It has elements of this sort of panpsychism shit, but what I'm trying to say is that, remember, in the past we've made the distinction between, you know, every event is unique, and that would go into the whole idea that you are a special thing, and that's the loneliness of you, is that, you know, you're just your own physical embodiment of whatever. Or, you know, things do repeat, and it's all just basically the same, I don't know, I want to say the same equation, but it's the same patterning. As soon as you zoom in on the coastline, it's just more coastline, and it's more coastline, and you just kind of like, crap, you know, it's always the same. It's all one and the same, so it doesn't matter where you are, you're everywhere. You know what I mean? It's that fractal geometry stuff, the Mandelbrottian distribution. So it's like, I wonder if he's just like, that's his axiom. It's just is fractal geometry. It's not uniqueness. Every little event is unique and blah, 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 blah. Like, it's the opposite of that. Everything is basically just the same thing. It's just, you know, you drill down, you find the same shit. You go up, you find the same shit. I don't know. I'm trying to understand it, but
I don't have it marked to go to it quickly, but I remember that he does talk about nominalism in here, which I take to be the position that Korzybski and me most of the time tend to share, where every event is entirely unique.
Right.
And nominalism is traditionally opposed to what they call realism, which is defined in this sense as belief in universals or Platonic forms.
Uh-huh.
And I guess that Watts is probably taking some position that's like, I want to be neither of those.
Yeah.
Because both of those are responses to a metaphysics that includes parts and wholes and whatever. And if I want to just be this radical holist, where there only is the iron block universe,
or
whatever, that would be a dichotomy that I don't have to pick a side. I'm just jutes out of that system.
Yeah.
The fact is that because no one thing or feature of this universe is separable from the whole, the only real you is the whole.
Is that... It's one of those very short kind of cogito ergo sum arguments. Does that work? No one thing can be separated from the whole. That premise seems relatively okay.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on what the definition of separate means, I'm probably willing to buy that we can't separate something from the universe.
Right.
Even if we say, okay, now it's in this empty room, it's the only thing in there, go open the door, you'll see the thing. We still haven't taken it out of the universe.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so if we grant that no thing is separable from the whole, then he just says, comma, the only real you is the whole. And I'm not quite sure how that follows.
Yeah, I that's what I'm trying to work out. Only real you.
Part of the context of this is a little bit of linguistic analysis about the way we tend to talk about the subject, capital I. Right?
Uh-huh.
I have a body is more common than I am a body.
Agreed.
Yeah,
sure. I think that's how we talk.
Mm-hmm.
I is used as a center of voluntary behavior and conscious attention. It usually refers to a center in the body, but different cultures place that in different places.
Like we put it in the head, apparently the Greeks put it in the heart, right, etc. But that it all comes down to there being some sort of central ego or controlling officer or homunculus that we place somewhere inside the skin bag. You can put it in different places, but that its primary functions are center of conscious attention and determiner of voluntary behavior. Is his, sort of quick linguistic analysis of the way we use the word I. And that all seems fine to me.
Sure.
But that doesn't help me. So that's kind of him defining the you part, in this, the conclusion of the very short argument being, you is the whole. All right, so what's the definition of you? It's that, it's the center of conscious experience and voluntary behavior determiner. But still, how does that make me the whole? I don't know. I can't be separated
I'm part
from
of the universe.
Fine. Yeah.
I don't know.
So we'll see if we can come back to it. We'll sort through the rest of what he develops in the book. So part of it, there's this coupling, this pair of relativism and holism. He uses a bunch of relativism, and I think that Watts thinks relativism taken to its logical conclusion leads you to holism. So he'll say things like this.
The outside world has no color, shape, weight, heat, or motion without the inside brains. It has these qualities only in relation to brains.
And that makes sense to me. I don't know if you like that relativist premise about, the basic point that we talk about in philosophy of mind all the time. Color's not in the world. At best, there are different wavelengths of electromagnetic energy, and we perceive them as, so that the greenness of the grass is in the relationship of the of the light to the eyeball, blah, 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 right?
Yep.
And then he's got this kind of Wittgensteinian attitude when he writes,
problems that remain persistently insoluble should always be suspected as questions asked in the wrong way. The world is neither form nor matter, for these are two clumsy terms for the same process.
So that's in there and part of it, and we like that. We've talked about that episode 14 or whatever. And then he does a bit of to invite another character to the party. I think this move comes from Whitehead, though he doesn't cite him as such. When he does a sort of really brief kind of intellectual history story where he's like, how did we get to this place? And he starts from, we had these religious stories about that there was the God up above that created everything and gave us the laws. And then the scientific revolution killed God, removed that from the story, but kept the material and the laws. So now we don't know how the material got here or how the laws got here, but we've still got those. And I think that's what he calls the crackpot myth. Because he said God was the potter who threw the world on a wheel, and created the material on the potter's wheel. And then science came in, killed God, cracked the pot. So now science is the crackpot myth. Was retained without the potter.
The world was still understood as an artifact, but on the model of an automatic machine. The laws of nature were still there without a lawmaker, giving us a fully automatic model. The all too intelligent God being replaced by a cosmic idiot.
Which I guess would be the Big Bang or whatever. And then the dumb, mute evolution of material according to the laws of physics.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And here's his philosophy of science in poetic form.
The man behind the microscope has this advice for you. Instead of asking what it is, just ask what does it do?
Which is, I guess, taking this step out from crackpot artifactual material reality to relational functional relativism.
Yes.
That it's not about what things are, but it's about how we interact with the things.
Or how the things interact with each other.
Yeah. Even though there aren't any separate things that are interacting, because it's all just one whole
Well, I think that's what we're trying to figure out here, right? I mean, ultimately,
and so then we've got the big other problem that he summarizes in this sentence.
Our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own, for we think in terms of language and images, which we did not invent, but which were given by society.
I like that you're nodding along with that one. I also, that's a premise that I'm willing to accept, and I also feel that how that serves his argument.
I do too. So there is something that's a kernel or a little nugget that I'm like, oh, okay, I'm starting to crack between you're not separate from the universe
together.
So everything's the same. Yeah, or everything is. You are. What was the second? You are the whole or whatever. That part is that's the connecting. The leg bone's connected to the hip bone kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little bit more.
Because we might want to say, if anything is separate and us, and it would be our own private thoughts and emotions.
Right, but if what you do is merely reflect your culture, then how are you not your culture just at a smaller scale? Now, I'm not saying
and then we're fractal again.
Yeah, and then we're fractal again. However, I don't know if that's justified. Because
who gives a shit? We're not here. We're not totally exegetical on the Dawdlers. We're trying to come up with some shit.
I know. I just was thinking, you could just say, it really does seem like he's trying to say this whole you're unique, I'm unique, we don't see the same color, we don't that's all bullshit. It seems like, is what he seems to be saying, is that it's all the same. And we've encountered this form of radical holism before a few times, I think, in conversations with friends and stuff like that. All just one big whole thing. You can't downscale, you can't upscale. It's just, you just encounter more of the same. And I'm surprised he never decided then to talk about the patterns of hurricanes and the patterns of galaxies, or you know what I mean? Why didn't he might have, that could have been useful to him, I suppose. Or the egg, or just the way things look.
What do you connect this dot better?
Well, a hurricane has a center, and then it has these arms that come out, and a galaxy can have that look as well. The idea that you'd have maybe you have an idea about what the picture of the Milky Way looks like, and then on a planet, you have patterns of moisture and air pressure that create this cloud formation that looks very similar. It's all, you know, like it's all part of the same thing. It's all creating the same kind of picture. You know, it reports to the same source or whatever it is, because it is the same source. If you have private thoughts that is just your culture, then you are just culture. You know, it's the fractal thing. But then if some aspect of our solar system mimics the aspect of the galaxy, and the planets, you know, have things that mimic the aspect of the, or whatever, the patterns or whatever of the, you know, it's like it's all just the same geometric. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say something. It's like it's all the same kind of marathon of scale, you know, or whatever. You never quite reach the end, because it's always, you can always, you know, halfway to here, halfway to there, you know, it's always just the same thing or whatever. You're never going to finish. You're always going to be the part of the whole. But that doesn't mean you can't.
Yes, and now we've got Zeno's paradoxes into the party.
That isn't to say that there isn't an answer to Zeno's paradox or whatever, but this, I'm just trying to get a sense for what he's thinking or what he's trying to say or communicate when he talks about, when he makes that jump between, you're not separate from the universe, you are the universe.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
That's I like that, adding those little memes in there.
We have now found out that many things which we felt to be basic realities of nature are social fictions arising from commonly accepted traditional ways of thinking about the world, including the world is made up of separate bits or things. Things are differing forms of some basic stuff. Individual organisms are such things, inhabited by independent egos. Opposite poles of relationships are in conflict. Death is evil, and life must be a war against it. And man must aspire to be the top species in control of nature.
All of which sounds like reasonable interpretations of the status quo.
Yeah, I was going to say that he's like setting up his thing that he's going to break down now.
Yeah. And he's saying, you know, and he adds right after that, fictions are useful so long as they are taken as fictions. But the trouble being that, and I thought I was paraphrasing him, but then I noticed my next highlighted sentence.
The troubles begin when the fictions are taken as facts.
So, yeah.
Right.
I agree. Good job, Watts. So, and then there's also this whole subset of these fictions that he calls the social double-bind game. You know, as a game player, to rope the triamond in, so here's what he claims are the rules of the social game.
First rule of the game. It's not a game. Everyone must play.
Uh-huh.
You must love us. You must continue to live.
/ play the game. You know, no quitting.
Right.
Be yourself, but play an acceptable role.
Oof.
Control yourself, but be natural.
Oh, God. This is awful.
Try to be sincere.
God.
Which, you know, it got lots of laughs out of that audience. And, you know, this is, again, bringing the humor in and whatever, but it's also relatively deep and interesting set of claims. I like all that stuff. Like, that's what society is.
Yeah, no, it brings you back to the COVID thing. You know, they seem to say one thing and then say the opposite. I can't remember all the details now of what it was that I saw at various times. What was it? It's like exercise, but don't exercise too much. You know?
Oh, yeah, the whole, right. When you no matter what you do, you're going to die or you're going to kill other people. Or you know.
Right. You know, exercise, but don't go out and exercise too much. You kill yourself and other people. Yeah, that sucks. I hate that game so much.
I know, but there's not enough of it. And, that's the whole thing about the trouble being is when fictions are taken as facts or games are taken as not games. The first rule of the game is it's not a game. And if more of us agreed that, no, it just is a game. Like rule 1 is wrong. That's a fiction. The world would be such a better place.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of our fellows abide by rule 1 and they were fucked from the outset as soon as they think this is not a game.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's the worst. One of the things about him is that he's a relativist primarily. I think where a lot of relativists come from is that they experience a whole bunch of cultures, like you were talking about. Some people, the homunculus is in the head, some it's in the heart, whatever it is. So I wonder if that all cultures seem to consider it in this way, if this is sort of a universal thing, that the first rule of the game is that it's not a game. Is that found everywhere? I imagine. I mean, if someone said, yeah, that sounds about right, I'd be like, damn, I guess I believe you. I would like to think there's cultures out there that think the game is not a game. I mean, the game is a game, or whatever.
I'm not enough of an anthropologist to know. I also hope that there are some that take it a little less seriously than America 2020 does.
Yeah. Or, a whole bunch of things like France and the revolution I don't know. Maybe there have been cultures in the past. I just don't know.
It is essential to understand this point thoroughly.
Uh-oh.
Audience.
The thing in itself is not only unknowable, it does not exist.
So this is, to go back to last week and Rorty or whatever, where, this is the whole Kant revolution, the Kantian / Copernican revolution in philosophy, where, okay, well, yeah, we can't know what reality is like, but they still enshrined this notion that there is a reality out there. There is a noumena. There is a thing in itself. It's just that it's removed from me.
Mm-hmm.
The Watts revolution is going a step further from Kant and saying it's not only that you don't know anything about it, that thing that you're talking about itself is just a fiction. It's not there.
Yeah.
This is not to say only that things exist in relation to one another, but that what we call things are no more than glimpses of a unified process.
And that reminds me of the blind man and the elephant, right?
You mean just that everybody's... yeah, I know the story, but you're just saying that people are just taking a leg or a tail or whatever, and they're the trunk, and they're just saying it's this, and some, but really it's all just one big elephant. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. It's all the phenotype of the expressed information in the DNA or whatever. You can call it a tail, but if you want to get... Okay, so to take an analogy, and this is going way back in my memory, I haven't read this forever, but there was a guy named Roger Jones who wrote, who was a physicist, and wrote a book about physics as metaphor, I think was the title. And one of the points in this book, if I remember accurately, is, all right, measure a tabletop. That's something we should be able to do as scientists. It's operationally defined. I've got my ruler, I've got my table, I put one next to another, I observe what marking, But the physicist, of course, gets all pedantic about it and says, all right, well, look closer and magnify in and whatever. Yeah, it might be near this ink blot on your ruler, but that itself has a length, and you can't get a precise length of the table. You can only get an approximation.
Yep.
That's good enough for your purposes. Does that table then have a length? Or are there atoms moving in and out? Or how could you ever find it if there was one or whatever? So I think that Kant would say, yes, the table has a length, but we can't measure it. And Watts is saying tables don't even have lengths. And to relate this back to the elephant story, where does the elephant's tail end and its body begin? Or whatever, right? There's no... You can chop it up for your own purposes, Mr. Butcher, and sell me a rump roast. But that doesn't mean, because our society functions that way, and you can go to New Seasons and order a tenderloin, that doesn't mean that bovine bodies really are chopped up that way. Is this helping? Like, for me, it like that was, to me, like I convinced I was like, oh, that's good. But I don't know how it sounds to the rest of you.
Well, to me, that's hard to say, because I guess the idea is you're carving nature at its joints, that type of thing. Literally.
Yeah, but the Wattsian nature doesn't have joints.
But the what in nature doesn't have joints?
The Watts-esque,
the
Wartsy nature.
Yeah. It has no joints. That's right. That makes sense.
Yep.
And so in that sense, yes, I when I go there, but that doesn't include my heavily biased view of tails and butts. You know?
Well, what do you mean? There are benefits that you can point to that accrue from carving the world in that way.
Yeah. If we go back to the length idea, for my purposes, it's just, it's the measuring something's length is like a game, right? Because there are all these basic rules that you apply to the situation, and at the end of the game, you have some number or whatever. Now, is that number heavily reliable all the way to the, end of the existence of time and everything? No, but it's just, I'm going to, with this crude instrument, just going to say, yeah, it's 30 inches or whatever. That's 30 meters. That's, that kind of thing. And while that's perhaps not doing philosophy, it is a way of drawing a picture. It's like he was saying before, he was like, you learn certain tools to be able to express certain things that you do, and that's kind of ultimately, if he's saying there is no length, that's fine with me. But we still carve nature at its joints. I don't know how else to put it. But this is going back to the idea of the fiction is not a fact or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah, you can't carve nature at its joints if it doesn't have joints.
Right. No, I get it what you're saying.
Yeah.
So then what are people doing?
And they're selling meat at the grocery store. They're participating in a game.
Yes.
That works for certain purposes.
Sure. And that's what I was saying about the length. Works for certain purposes of, primarily, I think when you're taking the measurement of something, I think it's serving communication, right? So that somebody else can say, I can say, okay, well, I'm moving this desk into your house. It's 30 inches long, wide or whatever. And you're like, oh crap. I did a measurement of my door and it's 25 inches or something like that. Like I'm communicating to you something about this world or whatever. And so that's but the game is the measurement, and specifically as to whether or not I take into account the width of the ink blot or whatever the hell, that's obviously drilling down beyond what the game's purpose is for or whatever.
Yep. Well, and this is where I bring in the terms projects and concerns. I'm concerned with the quote-unquote length of the table because it's relevant to my project of transporting that table inside my kitchen. Right. I'm content with a certain degree of crudeness.
Right.
Because that's
enough.
All that matters for me for this project or what, that's why I'm concerned with, it's good enough to measure it and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But I mean, in the Watsy thing, he's going all the way to, I think, I don't know if he would say this or not, but in order to be consistent, it seems as though he would have to say, there's no length of the table, just as there is no you or kitchen or project of transporting the table.
That's fine. And I'm not arguing against that, but I am trying to digest it, and I'm trying to operate out of what framework? And that's the part that at the moment is sort of confusing. I tried to import fractal geometry into the situation, but I'm not exactly sure if that's the framework that's matching with what it is that he's saying. But at the same time, is it just the language game or whatever? Is that the framework that that Watts is operating out of? And that's why a length doesn't exist. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what's his base of operation? Like, is it language? Is it the physical activities? Is it all of it? And if it's all of it, then that's a bigger project. So is all of it something that gets unified under his, way of looking at the world or whatever?
I like the fractal point. I don't know if it connects up or in what way it connects up with
I don't know
Watts's claims.
It was a shot in the dark.
I still kind of like the butcher example, and I think that it does connect up with the Watts, and just the idea that you can carve things up metaphorically or literally, and you can say, oh yeah, well, this is a cut of meat X. But that doesn't mean it exists in the body of the cow. It exists in the culinary game.
Sure, yeah. So ribeye there's no ribeye in the cow. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
There's muscles and things, or is there muscles? That's the other question. So
not really, because then I think that he's just universalizing that step.
Yeah.
If you can take some example of a quote-unquote thing and realize, oh, that thing isn't in the cow, it's just in the grocery store, or it's in the commercial interaction or the consumption interaction or whatever. So that's not really out there. It's just in our game. Now do that move with everything. Tables and chairs and beer bottles and whatever. Those don't exist out there. They just exist in various language games, human interaction. It's all...
So the question for me is he trying to say, and I'm importing a Donetian thing. I would say these other words, but right now I just want to stick with the simpler way of talking about it. Would Alan Watts say it's all designs with designers, or it's all designs without designers?
It's all design ed. In other, sort of in the, who was the biologist that said, everything is the way it is because it got that way? Isn't that a bumper sticker? I think from I forget who said it, but. So I think
I don't know that one.
Watts would probably, again, try to jump out of that game. Is it designed with the designer or not? I don't know. I mean, it's not really designed, or it's all designed. Either way. Tom Robbins said, I believe in nothing. Everything is sacred. I believe in everything. Nothing is sacred. And that those are kind of complementary faces that are different ways of perceiving, but they come out the same in the wash. So that, all right, well, is everything designed by an intelligence or by an unintelligence? It doesn't really matter. You can look at everything as designed if you want, or you can say nothing was designed. But either way, it just is what it is because it got that way.
Well, then how do we talk about the butcher and the butcher's game versus what it is that the butcher is cutting up, which is some other game, potentially, right? So if these are...
How do we do it? We do it by playing the game.
Which game?
The butcher game.
Okay, we do it by playing the butcher game, but the cow's not going to cut themselves up. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's no game
In
for
Monty
the cow.
Python, they would.
Know, right?
No.
Yeah. But there's no game for the cow. The cow, you know what I mean? So it's like, for us, there's a ribeye in there. So now we universalize that to saying, well, then there's probably no muscle, or, you know, it's all just one thing. I don't know. It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
So here's another
totally
thing that he says later. Yeah. So this is he's skipping slightly ahead of where you are, because he's saying, if you did do this, you know, when he writes,
as soon as one sees that separate things are fictions, it becomes obvious that non-existent things cannot perform actions. The difficulty is, most languages are arranged so that action verbs have to be set in motion by thing nouns. We forget that the rules of grammar are not necessarily the patterns of nature.
And I know that you hadn't totally bought step 1 yet, as soon as you see that separate things are fictions. But you could instead conditionalize it and say, well, if you were to grant that separate things are fictions, then it seems obvious that these fictions can't do anything. So then you wouldn't be able to ask the question or make the statement, well, cows don't play games or whatever. Well, because there aren't cows in the first place. By the time you've said cows doing things, you're playing the English game and a bunch of other games. You know, you're playing a bunch of different levels of games, but they're all happening inside the nervous system game, because it's all activities of your nervous system. And then you're playing the English game, because these are all sentences of English. And then there's layers and layers.
I must not understand it well enough, because I keep going back then to saying, well, then what is it? You know, there might as well not be there is no language game. Like, it's all just the nervous system game, or there's no nervous system game, it's all just the whatever game. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I like when you do the question you asked allows the next quote I had from Watts to answer, I think, quite directly.
Okay.
So if your question is, but yeah, Alan, but what is it? Quote,
to put it clumsily, it is what it does. More precisely, the organism, including its behavior, is a process which is to be understood only in relation to the larger and longer process of its environment. Parts are fictions of language that exist only for purposes of figuring and describing. We become confused if we do not remember this all of the time.
Not that that's a good answer, but I feel like it's a pretty direct Watts answer to what you just asked.
Yeah, I mean, parts are fictions based in language or whatever, right?
Yep. The cow, including its behavior, is a process to be understood only in relation to the environment. To chop it out and call it a part, a separate object, that's just English doing its thing. The only reason it's there is because you are another organism doing what it does, and what you does is talk in English, and you write books and treatises and have podcasts, and so you're just another aspect of the whole, a little part that you can concentrate on if you choose to, doing its thing.
This is why he's at the margin.
Okay.
Right. This is it. Because he's asking Richard Dawkins to accept what Richard Dawkins would believe to be totally and utterly absurd, right? Dawkins would scoff heartily at this notion, which is not I have a feeling that this view is not unique to Watts, right? This view's got to have been encountered on a number of occasions. You can't look at a tree and say it is itself just a tree. It is only in the context of, all the other things that are around it. Birds, soil, wind, whatever we would discretize. But if you stop discretizing all that stuff, you see that it's just one big thing, all kind of happening together or whatever. And that things we pick out.
Yep.
And of course, I don't know why we're picking things out. That throws a wrench in it to me, but that's a whole separate thing. Or not. It's not separate from the universe. Because that's the other thing. Why would things, if everything's just a whole, then why would something within that whole pick out things separately? Why wouldn't it just behave as a whole?
Well, it is behaving as a whole. It can do no other. In the course of its behaving, it happens to play language games. The cow chews its cud and you write a poem. And this is, maybe it's another example of this thing that you don't like of, making everything this postmodern flatness or whatever, that all of your science is in some way equivalent to a cow munching some hay or whatever they do. Because it's just, and Watts's version of the flattening is, well, you're both just parts of the whole. Well, you're both just doing what you do.
Well, why are we privileging whole over parts? Meaning, if it's all just a language game, whole is just another part of the language.
Because of premise 1, no thing or feature of this universe is separable from the whole of the universe.
Okay.
So we already accepted that there is a whole. We're problematizing whether there are also parts. Because part people have both, right? Well, yeah, of course there's a whole, but there's also the parts that make up the whole.
Right.
But the holist says, well, maybe we should just Occam's razor off parthood itself. Mm-hmm. Everybody agrees there's a whole, so I don't need to establish that. But you need to, the burden is on you to prove to me that there are parts. And you haven't, or something like that.
Yeah, I think
this is again me adding my
right.
stuff.
I was going to say burden of proof. Jesus Christ. I think that I wouldn't say that is settled per se. But just because we agree that there is a whole, and someone wants to defect and say, "Aha!" but there are no parts, doesn't mean that the whole doesn't also come under scrutiny, does it not? Just because we agree, that doesn't mean that the whole is exempt from this same line of questioning, right? Why wouldn't the whole? It's all part of the language. It's all part of the language game. We're picking out a whole. A whole in and of itself is a discrete entity, is it not? So then what is the whole in the context of? How do we know it's a whole?
Well, as I understand it, and if I'm using these words right, I think this is a debate within what they call mereology, the study of parts and wholes.
Sure.
And Watts is being a strict holist, and then you could all, but the mereological position of, yes, but there are also parts, is his foil. And he's saying, against you, part person, I don't need to make an ontological argument for the existence of wholes, because part people already accept wholes. They only add something additional. I'm not going the other direction and arguing against the nihilist who says there is nothing. Against him, I might have to argue positively for the existence of a whole.
And that would be not beneficial to your argument against the parts. Because the whole, the idea about the parts not existing is that they are in the context of each other and everything is one thing. But then if a whole, how do you know it's a whole? Where does the whole end? If it is a whole, if you were to give it a linguistic object, whole, like how do you know? What is it that guides you to know that it is whole?
He uses a couple of what now sound like kind of cliche or trite examples. I don't know if they sounded this way in the 1950s. One of them is, I will pick up my chalk and I will make a circular motion on the chalkboard, leaving behind some residue. I'll ask the students, what have I done? Most of them will say, well, you drew a circle on the board. Few of them will say, oh, you artistically indicated a hole in the chalkboard, or whatever, But that both of those, when considered, are equally viable interpretations, one of which privileges the interior, you made a circle, you drew, and the other privileges the exterior, you made a hole in the chalkboard. Every boundary, by definition, has an inside and an outside. And that because of that, if you have anything, if you have boundaries at all, then you automatically have to have holes. WHOLE.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And the other example is that he will talk about rainbows, right? Being the kind of paradigm case of the quote-unquote object that only exists because there's an observer and a point of view and whatever. It's not totally relative because you can have intersubjective agreement. If you brought a crowd of people, they would all hallucinate the same rainbow. And they could agree about where it is, what its shape is, where it appears to end, etc. But which color's on top, all these things. They'd agree about a bunch of things. But there's also a sensible claim. Well, that rainbow's not really there, quote unquote. You can't ride on it or touch it, or it's not. It's only in the relationship between the observer or the crowd of observers and the raindrops and the sun and the whatever. Blah, blah, blah. It's just in this relationship. And I think that he's just claiming everything, including the beer bottle and including you, is a rainbow. Everything is a hole in the chalkboard. Everything is a rainbow. It's all fictional and it's all interpretable in at least two ways. It's all intelligently designed and ignorantly designed and not designed.
I don't know.
and the science guy is like, okay, you know what? It's fucking late and this is bullshit and I quit.
Well, no, I just don't think any of the what I was asking was not answered. And so I think because there is no answer, and that's fine. I think he just found a place potentially to stop. And he was like, okay, I like this.
Just to be clear, could you phrase bluntly what the question is that is unanswered in your opinion?
If something we call a whole has a boundary and it doesn't have parts, how do we know it's a whole? What is the context we are provided? If it has context, then what is that context, and is it part of it?
That's not blunt enough or whatever.
It has a boundary, right?
But the whole doesn't have a boundary, I don't think.
Why not?
And his point is there are no
boundaries.
Parts. Well, there are perceived boundaries as there are perceived rainbows.
But there are no boundaries, right? I mean, that's the language game. Perceived this and that.
Yeah, I guess so.
So there are no boundaries.
Yeah.
So then there's no whole. There's just a...
There's only the whole.
No, there's only a boundless open. Like, there's no boundaries. A whole needs some boundary. In order for us to...
Even science doesn't say that, right?
Why not?
The universe...
Fuck.
However,
they talk about multiverses
works,
and
like
shit. Bubbles in a bathtub. I mean, scientists talk about that stuff. But regardless, if it's a whole of what? I don't buy the contextless entity. He's asking us to say that parts are not separable from the universe, but then asking us to buy that the universe is separate from nothing and everything. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, okay, are there boundaries or not? If there are no boundaries, then there is no whole. It's just whatever. We don't even know. It just goes. But boundaries give us context. This is my whole thing about individuals and groups. Like, it's the mirrorology thing. And I guess it would depend on what your definition of whole is. But a whole without a boundary? I don't know. If I'm willing to go that
the
far.
question, or the family of questions that feels unanswered, is unanswered. But it's Wittgenstein style claimed that it's a bad question, I think, is DeWatt's response to that. Like, you're so entrenched in your game that you're not able to get outside that and see that question only seems like a question because you're so thoroughly bewitched by language and culture and blah, 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 that you think it's a question, but you need to transcend that and get outside and realize that's not a good question. Maybe.
This is if that is what Watts thought, then this is a problem with margin hunters, in my view. It's because they're always right, you know? There's no test they can go up against because there's always a way out. And it's, to me, that's sort of like, well, then, okay, I can see now why you're at the margin, because people are like, all right, well, I tried, but I'm not getting a whole lot except for that I'm the one who doesn't understand. Okay. And geniuses may be that way, and that's fine, but I guess I'm just one of the idiot morons. And,
finally, that's what it took to get you to admit it.
Yeah.
Alan Wards.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Any certainly known future is an event of which we can say you've had it. And in that sense, it's past. When we play games, and we say in chess or in bridge or whatever game you're playing, the outcome of the game becomes certain. We at that point cancel the game and begin a new one. Because the whole zest of the thing, and which takes me back to the idea that this whole thing is a hide-and-seek game, is that you don't know what the next order coming up is. But one thing you can be sure of, it will be an order, and it will comprehend you. At the moment, we stand at a time in history where we're beginning to think of the great countdown on the end of the human race. Terrifying possibility that through atomic energy, we may obliterate this planet and turn the whole globe into a star. Maybe that's the way all the stars started. Imagine, this great thing coming up. The countdown on the end. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Where have you heard that before?